Public enemy number one in the United States, the problem of dangerous drugs. America's public enemy number one in the United States is drug abuse.
Lessons the war on drugs should have learned from Prohibition. Prohibition failed with alcohol. Why? Alcohol prohibition was a massive failure in the United States of America. Why is that? It was a failure because it created a massive black market, making the production, distribution, and sale of alcohol highly profitable for organized crime. This led to an increase in violence, corruption, and illegal activities, undermining the law and making enforcement nearly impossible. It gave rise to mobsters such as Al Scarface Capone, Johnny the Fox Torrio, and Frank the Enforcer Nitti. And then there's of course the fact that many people saw drinking as a personal choice that primarily affected the user, not society at large. This made prohibition feel like an overreach of government power, infringing on personal freedoms. Combined with the fact that people continued to drink despite the ban, it became clear that you can't easily legislate morality or stop people from engaging in activities they enjoy, especially when they don't view them as inherently harmful. This widespread resistance undermined the legitimacy of the law and contributed to its ultimate repeal. Parallels between alcohol and drug prohibition. When we ban substances that there is a demand for, it results in a strong criminal underground market with extremely inflated prices of unregulated, dangerous products. Ironically, the ones that need to be monitored the closest. These markets are run by organized crime syndicates like the cartels, the mafia, or street gangs who operate in a culture of violence. Poor people and minorities are arrested in disproportionate numbers as police go for the easy-to-spot, low-hanging fruit, while cartels and gang bosses operate with basic immunity. Due to the fact that it's easier to smuggle and more profitable to sell harder, more potent substances on the black market, that leads to more dangerous drugs being the norm, such as fentanyl during the opiate crisis, gaining popularity due to the restrictions put on the prescribing of opiates such as OxyContin. Where there is a black market and illegal activity, you can count on corruption, often in the form of bribes or extortion. Crooked police, governments, and politicians manipulate things unbeknownst to the average Joe, allowing crooked authority figures to advance while addictions go untreated. Here are some unintended consequences of drug prohibition. Incarceration rates skyrocket, as well as overdoses, STD rates, prostitution, and homicide rates. Notice the spike during Prohibition, followed by a decline with its repeal, and then again skyrocketing after Nixon declares war on drugs. Interesting, isn't it? Here's a quick history lesson regarding the legal status of drugs in America. It's 1900. Coca-Cola contains actual cocaine. Your average cop is treated with heroin. And even toddlers are being given over-the-counter morphine while they teeth. Everyone is smoking pot and drinking like a fish. Ah, yeah, the good old days. They must have built us just a little bit stronger back then. Now our 12-year-old kids won't go to school because they're having a panic attack over the thought of putting their cell phone down and missing the latest TikTok video. What the fuck happened? We're going to take a closer look at how we went from giving our 2-year-old children heroin to 7-year mandatory minimum sentences for smoking a joint, all the way to bring us to the opiate epidemic we're facing today. Hold on your hats, it's going to be a bumpy ride, and for many, quite upsetting. In 1914, they introduced the Harrison Narcotic Tax Act, which made it illegal to possess heroin and cocaine without a doctor's prescription. However, in those days, it was not very difficult to get a prescription, as they were both very common pain relievers. Alcohol prohibition was made illegal according to the 18th Amendment in 1920 and repealed with the 21st Amendment in 1933 by President FDR. The Federal Bureau of Narcotics was created in 1930, and Harry J. Anslinger, a big player in the Prohibition Bureau, is the first head of the FBN. With alcohol legal again in 1933, Anslinger had to think fast or risk getting his department shut down, so he launched his Reefer Madness campaign that was highly successful but for all the wrong reasons. We'll get to that later. Which led to the 1937 Marijuana Tax Act, which made the production, distribution, and consumption of marijuana illegal. It was not until the 1970s that heroin and cocaine were made fully illegal, regardless of whether or not you had a prescription. However, recreational use has been illegal since 1914. The difficulty with which one obtains a prescription basically depends on your relationship you had with the doctor. Much like opiates today, the ones with the most serious pain, the smooth-talking con men, the friends of the doctors, or wealthy people could obtain prescriptions while the rest of us regular Joes suffered. So how did one man basically convince an entire country to outlaw these drugs? Well, for starters, public opinion was shifting to sway a little in his favor as people were starting to get wise to the addictive properties of cocaine and heroin. Harry J. used a brilliant strategy. It was very controversial by today's standards, but brilliant regardless. In order to gain support, he preyed on the fears of middle-class white Americans. Anslinger had just the right case to push his agenda forward when in 1933, Victor Licata, a 21-year-old second-generation Italian-American immigrant, murdered his family, including both parents, 2 brothers, and a sister, with an axe in Tampa Bay, Florida, apparently under the influence of marijuana. I say apparently because this was later deemed to be false. As it would later be found out, he had a pre-existing diagnosis of schizophrenia, and his parents, against recommendations from health professionals, refused to have him committed. Apparently the marijuana had played no role whatsoever, but Harry Anslinger wasn't the type of guy to let a little something called the truth get in the way of his new campaign, Reefer Madness.
These high school boys and girls are having a hop at the local soda fountain. Innocently they dance, innocent of a new and deadly menace lurking behind closed doors. Marijuana, the burning weed with its roots in hell. In this film, you will see the ease with which this vicious plant can be grown in your neighbor's yard, rolled into harmless-looking cigarettes, hidden in an innocent shoe or watch case.
If you want a good smoke, try one of these.
You will meet Bill, who once took pride in his strong will as he takes the first step toward enslavement.
Of course, if you're afraid.
Smoking the soul-destroying reefer, they find a moment's pleasure, but at a terrible price. Debauchery, violence, murder, suicide, and the ultimate end of the marijuana addict.
Plate bastard.
Hopeless insanity. See this important film now, before it is too late.
The Reefer Madness campaign, spearheaded by Harry Anslinger and the Federal Bureau of Narcotics, began in the early 1930s and ran in full force through the 1950s. However, its influence persisted much longer, shaping public perception and drug policy for decades. It wouldn't be till the 1960s that science caught up and finally dispelled all the harmful myths that were created around marijuana and other drugs. The myths that were rammed down the throats of parents, teachers, politicians, and anyone with a TV, magazine, or newspaper between 1930 and 1960.
Drugs are bad. You shouldn't do drugs. If you do them, you're bad. Because drugs are bad, okay? It's a bad thing to do drugs, so don't be bad by doing drugs, okay? That'd be bad. Drugs are bad, okay?
For example, the myth that marijuana is a gateway drug. You might even believe this to this day. And that's because you've been conditioned by all authority figures in your life, despite the fact that correlation does not mean causation. Just because someone smokes pot and does cocaine, correlation does not mean that smoking pot led to the use of cocaine, causation. And furthermore, alcohol and nicotine, both legal substances, are more strongly associated with drug use later in life than marijuana. And one final note to show just how big of a schmuck this Anslinger guy really was. His so-called expert testimony for cannabis prohibition was backed by only 1 out of 30 doctors. It wasn't about science, it was about selling dissent and fueling his racist, fear-mongering agenda. The same agenda that killed Billie Holiday while hypocritically sparing others such as Judy Garland. I'm not going to argue that drugs are not dangerous, scary, and that they do a lot of bad things to the addicts and they can ruin their life. I could not win that fight under our current laws and regulations. What I am here to do is point out that the reason things have gotten so bad in North America is because we've been heavily influenced by a bunch of extremely harmful racist lies. If it were not for those lies, I believe in my heart of hearts that this entire epidemic could have been avoided. Prohibition does not work. It didn't work for alcohol, and why we doubled down on drugs based primarily on the obsessive, deranged, racist lies of an unhinged lunatic who made Nathan Bedford Forrest look like Danny Tanner is beyond me. In closing, the current approach to drug use, prohibition, has proven to be a failure in addressing the core issues of addiction. Instead of reducing drug use or protecting public health, it has led to increased harm across many dimensions of society. Legalizing and regulating drugs could lead to safer substances, reduced violence, and the creation of a more compassionate and effective system of addressing addiction. It is time to rethink the war on drugs and focus on public health solutions, rather than criminalizing individuals struggling with addiction. Thanks for tuning in today. If you like this video, don't forget to hit the like and subscribe button, and I'm going to leave you with a few of Harry Anslinger's more well-known quotes. Have a good day.